Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're walking in Memphis. The topic of this Walking in Memphis, USWA Wrestling from February 6th, 1993. There's a couple things I want to jump into before we get into this. I may need to change the format of switching back and forth between USWA and CWA. I had a playlist of about 200 USWA videos that I was sourcing these videos I review from, and somehow that playlist got taken off of YouTube. I don't know if it was DMCA'd or just whoever made the original playlist decided to delete it. If you notice, if you go back on my old ones reviewing USWA, the links no longer work. So the amount of USWA content out there has significantly shrank. I'm going to continue to try and find USWA content so I can alternate back and forth between the two decades, between the CWA content in the 80s and the USWA content of the 90s. I like that format. I like seeing how different it is and how much has changed in the decades. But there may come a time where there's CWA back to back, just because there's a lot more videos out there for me to review. Just giving you guys that heads up. The format may change a little bit. There's still going to be a weekly Walking in Memphis show. It just may all turn to be 75% CWA, 25% USWA, or even a greater disparity just because of the amount of videos that are out there. That being said, that was for the people that watch all the videos. For those of you that this is the first time you clicked on any of my videos, first off, welcome. Thank you very much for checking me out. What we do here, we review old shows from Memphis Wrestling, either from the 80s or 90s, as you could guess with just what I said. I rate everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. And for the Memphis shows, I go segment to segment, basically from commercial break to commercial break. So whatever falls within that segment is what I'm going to review, whether it be interviews, whether it be matches, whatever it may be. Again, 1 is the best, 5 is the worst. Let's jump right in. We start off with the Shadow versus Jerry the King Lawler. This was pretty decent. This is your normal squash match with a star. Lawler picks up a pretty easy win. At the end of the match, Brian Christopher comes out, starts antagonizing Lawler, which brings out Doink the Clown. This is the Matt Bourne version of Doink. I noticed it by his face on some of the promos later on. And the timeline and the fact that there were different Doinks, it's kind of hard without going back and looking at the specific timeline of the character to know who it was without really checking him out. But noticing the mannerisms that Matt Bourne would make as Doink, this is the Matt Bourne version, which in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, is the best version of the character, is the version that is palatable compared to the other more juvenile, more kid-based version. Anyway, this does have some of that kid-based stuff in it. While Lawler and Christopher are arguing, Doink is putting banana peels around the ring. Christopher has Lawler start chasing him. They run around the ring. Lawler slips on the banana peels. Again, like I said, some of the childish stuff is here. I do feel, however, that even with that Matt Bourne brought a sinister element to it that wasn't portrayed with either Steve Lombardi or Ray Apollo or any of the other people that portrayed Doink. It felt more evil, even though it was very hokey. They continue to beat him up until Jeff Jarrett comes out to make the save. Interesting thing, if you watch this video, and I recommend checking it out now in case the USWA or whoever owns these is going and putting in DMCA claims against them. I recommend checking out this video if you do want to, and it is going to be in the description. Jeff Jarrett's wearing what looks to be Rock and Roll Express tights, and I know Jarrett had some high-colored, very similar tights to them, but this is basically almost exactly the same of what they would have worn in this era. So I don't know if maybe he was trying to copy the style, or maybe he's just legitimately borrowing a pair of their tights for this show. They run off. We get an interview. We go right into an interview with Burt Prentice, who's talking about a boxing match he's going to have with Miss Texas, who, if you don't know, is Jacqueline. This is all pretty good. I mean, you got Lawler. I've talked about how Brian Christopher, is one of my favorites of this era for Memphis. Doink and the best version of Doink, Burt Prentice, who's highly underrated. For that whole first segment, I'm giving that a 5. We come back for the next segment. We have Miss Texas talking about her part. She has the boxing gloves on as well, which brings out Burt Prentice, which also brings out Doink. Doink throws a pie in Miss Texas's face. That brings out Brian Christopher, which also brings out Lawler and Jarrett to help run the heels away. Just a continuing thing. The theme is going to go through the show of Doink and Brian Christopher versus Lawler and Jarrett, which I like that. I like the fact that there's a common thread going through the show. The most compelling storylines on any wrestling show, yes, you have different players in it, but the most compelling things are when there's a common story going throughout, whether it be now with the bloodline starting and ending the show and having multiple segments in between, or the heyday of Austin versus The Rock, or, you know, when the McMahon-Helmsley regime was in charge, that they were the constant storyline and other storylines either fed off of them or were part of that. I like that storytelling. Going from that, we go right into a match with Mr. Clyde versus Jeff Jarrett. Jarrett picks up an easy win here. Again, you're not really going to see Match of the Year candidates on here. You're going to see basically highlighting one guy. This is your quote-unquote squash match era of wrestling. After that, we get Brian Christopher and Doink come out. Doink puts down baby oil or canola oil, cooking oil at this point, and pretty much the same thing. Jeff Jarrett slips in it. They start beating up on Jarrett, which brings out Lawler again. Kind of a rinse and repeat of the first segment, but it still was pretty good. I'm going to give all this. I thought it was all pretty good. I thought it was a 5. Again, you got the two heels that are wrecking havoc on the show. The two faces that are trying to run them off. Now, going from that, we get a segment with Jerry Lawler coming out for an interview, which he brings out Downtown Bruno, who at the time was Harvey Whippleman in WWE, or WWF at the time. They're talking about the problem being the WWF and Doink being a WWF competitor. I want to say this was right on the cusp of the Vince McMahon as a heel in USWA time. I don't know my times exactly, but I know that there was a lot of crossover. Guys like Savage, Owen and Bret Hart, Vince himself would come down to Memphis, and there was a lot of talent going back and forth between the two companies. I believe this was definitely in that era. We see a video of Bruno as Harvey Whippleman with Kamala basically attacking Howard Finkel, which brings us to a promo by the Fink. The Fink does the promo in very much quasi-heel mode. It's kind of interesting to see the Fink play a stuck-up northern character, kind of. He did dive a little bit into the Andy Kaufman aspect of it. It was kind of I would say maybe a tribute to Andy Kaufman, more so than anything else. And then they go back to Lawler and Bruno talking again. Bruno's pretty much imitating Hulk Hogan through this. This was really good. I did enjoy it. I'm giving this segment a 4. Next up, we have Richard Lee and the Moondogs, who at this time were Spot and Splat. They do a little promo. They go right into a match with the Scorpion and John Torman. I don't know if they got disqualified, but they're in there hitting them with chairs, and it's going wild there. The Moondogs were known to be hardcore wild wrestlers in Memphis. This brings out Mike Samples, who then brings out Doink as well, which leads us into, again, Jarrett and Lawler coming out, and the whole segment going off. They didn't really announce who won. I'm going to guess the match was either DQ for the face team, or not the face team, but the quote-unquote, for lack of a better word, the jobber team of Torman and Scorpion. For all that, I'm going to give that segment a 4. Again, we're kind of started getting into that a little bit too repetitive, whereas the MO was good, but you're doing the same thing over and over again. Took a little bit from it. Now, going from that, our next segment is just a promo with Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett. This is all fantastic. Both these guys were amazing at the time. Jeff Jarrett, as you can see, you can watch him on AEW every week at the time of this recording, and he's still really good at a promo. This was really good and really fun with them talking about Brian Christopher and Doink the Clown. I'm giving that segment a 5. Next up, we have the aforementioned Mike Samples, who does an interview with the Bruise Brothers. If you're a longtime fan, you know I'm not a fan of the Bruise Brothers because, best I could tell, they made some questionable tattoo decisions. Best case scenario, worst case scenario. They're people I wouldn't like to hang out with because of their views on other races. If I don't want to get demonetized for flat out saying what I want to say here, so I'm trying to toe a line a little bit. At the best case, they made some bad tattoo decisions. Worst case, they're people that don't like other people because of the way they look, and I'll leave it at that. This was a decent promo. I'm going to take that out of my objectivity here as much as I can. The Bruise Brothers go right into a match, and this is Ron and Don Harris against Jerry Gorman and Josh Johnson. And again, this was just a highlight, a squash match for these two guys. Although I thought it was done really well. I thought this put over the Bruise Brothers as good or better than I've ever seen them put over on anything, whether that be in WWE, WCW, ECW, here, TNA. This was the best the Bruise Brothers ever looked, in my opinion. In this here, they look like the Road Warriors. And not in a bad way, not like a clone. They looked like they were dominant like the Road Warriors were. This was a good showing. Like I said, probably the best way to highlight their talent, in my opinion, that I've ever seen. I'm going to give that a 4. They do pick up a pretty easy and overwhelming win, in my opinion. Except we're going into the final segment of the show. We get a music video with PG-13 hyping up their debut, which is coming up soon. And they do a freestyle rap over Hip Hop Hooray by Naughty by Nature sample, or instrumental. This is really good. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I like PG-13. I'm a big fan of theirs. I think if they would have came around 10 years later when it was more accepted that wrestlers were a little bit smaller, they'd probably be one of the top tag teams of that generation. Unfortunately, for the generation they wrestled in, they were a little bit on the small side, which I think always kind of held them back a bit. This was good. This is a lot like what you see with the Acclaim nowadays. Very similar to that. I mean, they are not the best rappers in the world. If they were, they'd probably have a rap record deal at some point. And I'm sure they may have put out a rap record in Memphis. I just don't know about it. If they did and you know about it, let me know in the comments. And if they did, let me know the name, because I actually buy that. I mean, I don't know if I'd want it for listening purposes, but I'd like to have it as a collector purposes. Anyway, Hip Hop Hooray is a great song. I love Naughty by Nature, one of my favorite rap groups ever. I pretty much listen to all their music since they came out. They're outstanding. I think they're a little bit underrated in my opinion. When I was in high school, and I'm aging myself here, I even bought, and I know we're going on a sidebar here, they had a catalog in one of their cassette, what is it? The cover, or whatever you say, where you unfold it and it shows you all the liner notes. They had a catalog for stuff you could buy. I bought a Naughty by Nature t-shirt and a pair of Naughty by Nature boxer shorts. And the t-shirt, I don't know what happened to the t-shirt, but for some reason I didn't keep it long. It either got ripped or torn, or I messed it up playing football or basketball or something. So I didn't have the t-shirt for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe wore it 4 or 5 times at the most. I don't know. I just didn't have the t-shirt that long. The boxers, those boxers were quality. I kept those boxers for about 5 years, and it wasn't like and again, I know I'm going off on a tangent. It wasn't like they were filled with holes and all torn up and the elastic was broken. No, I don't even remember why I got rid of them, but to the day I got rid of them, they were still almost like they were brand new. Yes, some of the logos had faded off. I mean, it was screen printed on in the early 90s, so of course some of the logos are going to fade on that. But they held up pretty well for, I would say, at least 5 years. I know I kept them long enough that I was out of high school when I was wearing them, and I don't remember if I bought it on their first or second album came out, which this would have been around the time of their second album, which would have been 93. I graduated in 95. I moved in 98. I think they came with me on the move. I don't remember if I kept them much longer after that, though. But anyway, I know I just went off on a tangent. Just my recollection of Naughty by Nature and how big of a fan I am. Going from that, and this is all within the same segment, we have TD Steele and Jimmy Sadler going up against Doink and Brian Christopher. Of course, Doink and Brian Christopher pick up the win here. That leads us right into a promo with Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett, which leads us back into another promo with Doink and Brian Christopher. These are separated by them showing the local card coming up, so it wasn't like they went back to back. Overall, for that last segment, even though they packed a bunch in there, I'm going to give that a 5. This to me was a very good show, and I think a lot of your opinion is going to depend on how much you like or dislike the Doink character. I really did at this point. Like I said, I like this version of Doink, so to me it made it a really good show in my opinion. If you're not a fan of that character, you're probably not going to have the same feeling I do about this, because the show was basically dominated by the story of Doink and Brian Christopher against Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett. So that's going to take your opinion. For me, I thought it was overall very enjoyable. I'm giving it a 5. I highly recommend checking out the show. And again, there's going to be a link right here in the description. With all that being said, let's smash that like button. Share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And if you made it all the way to the end, let's put Doink in the comments for Doink the Clown, whether you love him or hate him, and let me know. How about that? Instead of just Doink, put I love Doink, I hate Doink. Put it down here in the comments. Let me know what you think about Doink. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and we've been walking in Memphis.